Good evening, everyone. We're about to begin. Could we encourage those who are sitting maybe on the end, if you want to sort of sit over here a little bit closer, a little bit closer to the panel? It would be helpful, I'm sure. We'll give just a minute for the remaining participants. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to those who are online, watching online. My name is David McCauley. I'll be the moderator tonight. I'm working with GEF and GCF on their efforts to improve access and impact. And my background is in the areas of environment and climate finance, and was previously at the Asian Development Bank as climate director, and at WWF as the senior vice president. So a real pleasure to be here with you this evening. We have a good amount of information to get through in a short period of time, and I'm happy to say that we're going to try to keep that to about an hour to make it efficient, because the GEF, and I guess we'll give GCF some credit as well, have organized a social event after this, and hopefully that will all come off. There's always some logistics involved, and we'll wait to hear with some suspense from our hosts as to how that is working out. But I'm very pleased to be here to welcome you, and also to kick off this discussion on such an important topic. It is one of the few here at COP that everyone can agree is important and is needed. Sometimes for slightly different reasons, but I think there's a common understanding of the need. And so we'll be hearing about some very concrete efforts that are ongoing in this regard. And I'd like to begin by introducing Mr. Dirk Meyer. He is DG for Multilateral Policy, Transformation, and Climate at BMZ, the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much, and a very warm welcome at this time of the day. We're probably all a bit exhausted, but still I hope we'll have a great discussion today. So, dear friends, supporters, colleagues, let me start by thanking the GEF for organizing this event. It's a great opportunity to discuss ideas on how to enhance access to climate finance. As we have seen with the OECD's latest report, we need to increase our collective efforts to reach the $100 billion climate finance as soon as possible, while overall trends are showing upwards and indicate that the climate finance target will be met in 2022. Access to climate finance still remains one of the main challenges for developing countries, especially LDCs and SIDS. And when you listened to all the discussions around all the side events I had, at least, I know that it is very much on top of the agenda. The main challenges the international climate finance architecture faces today are an increased fragmentation, a lack of procedural harmonization, limited coordination across funds, as well as multiple barriers when it comes to mobilizing finance from the private sector. Germany is the biggest contributor to the GCF as well to the GEF. Together with our partners, we aim at using our voice to demand for change within the boards of the climate funds and initiatives. Our collective vision is to increase the 4 Cs, coherence, coordinations, no, not 4 Cs, that's a different one, coherence, coordination, efficiency, so 2 Cs and 2 Es, efficiency and effectiveness of the overall climate finance architecture. And therefore, we are highly welcome the joint declaration of the 4 climate funds. We are actively working at both fund and systemic level to improve access to climate funds and maximize their impact potential. Many of the points raised in this declaration are in line with what we have been calling for some time now: strengthening synergy potential and coherence, joint monitoring, evaluation and learning formats, harmonization of processes and procedures, as well as an increased focus on adaptation finance and private sector mobilization, in particular through deeper cooperation with the MDBs. I'm glad that those asks found their way into the joint declaration of the climate funds so prominently. All in all, this is very encouraging and to be commended. Going forward, you can count on the German government's full support for implementation. While we would like to congratulate the climate funds on reaching this important milestone, we would also like to highlight another issue that is of great importance to us. We want to encourage the climate funds to place a central focus on country ownership. Furthermore, we see great merit in following programmatic or platform-based approaches that put our partner countries firmly in the driver's seat, and would like to encourage the climate funds to explore this where possible. We also would like to encourage the climate funds to include the loss and damage fund we launched at this COP. In times of multiple and interrelated crises, national budgets are put under increasing amounts of stress. It is therefore of utmost importance to use scarce resources in the most effective and efficient way. Vulnerability should be a key criterion of directing climate finance to where it is most needed, especially in LDCs and SIDS. In addition, we believe that a strong focus on leveraging additional sources of funding is key, as the main historical polluters, the industrialized countries, and increasingly also the emerging economies, have a special responsibility. Hence, we would like that the climate funds explore ways to expand the donor base beyond traditional contributors, both sovereign and non-sovereign, and with the loss and damage fund, we made the first step. Besides the expansion of the contributor base, there needs to be a strong emphasis on engaging the private sector more strategically. The private sector has a unique ability to support innovation, to mobilize resources and catalyze action on climate change and sustainable development. Multilateral development banks, in their function as implementing agencies of the climate funds, can play a key role in mobilizing private capital for climate action. Thus, the climate funds should leverage the potential of the MDBs to engage the private sector and tailor funding opportunities accordingly. An example for innovative MDB involvement can be found in the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, which will be operationalized in 2024. A minimum of 25% of GBFF resources is set to be programmed by MDBs and EFIs, which is meant to leverage additional private sector funding and co-financing. And we will be very strong, insist on that. Let me reiterate that we strongly support this initiative to improve access to finance and impact. This is closely aligned with our thinking around the reform of the climate finance architecture. And as I already said, we are ready to support the implementation, and I'm really very much looking forward to the following discussion. Thank you very much.
much for those broad-based and comprehensive opening remarks. I probably should have said at the outset, but now that you've heard referred to by Mr. Mayor, the joint declaration, there was, for those of you who are not aware, there was just several days ago issued this declaration, and you've heard the key elements of it now, so I don't need to reiterate that. Thank you very much. And I encourage you to check the websites of the climate funds. It's there for your reading pleasures. You can Google it under Enhancing Access and Increasing Impact, a joint declaration of the heads of the Adaptation Fund, the Climate Investment Funds, the Global Environment Facility, and the Green Climate Fund. Very good. So our second opening speaker to help us get started here is Fiona Gilbert. She is a director of climate finance and adaptation at the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water for the government of Australia, but not more significantly, but also significantly, and where she and I have met and spent some time together. She is a co-chair this past year of the ad hoc program to look into what happens after the $100 billion target approach to climate finance runs its course, also known as one of the worst acronyms ever created in UNFCCC, NCQG, or the New Collective Quantified Goal on Climate Finance. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Fiona. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, David, and it's a real pleasure to be with you all today. Good evening. Yes, my name is Fiona Gilbert. I'm from the Government of Australia, and I'm here just to give an overview of the NCQG, what it is, our work program, where we are up to in the process, and also the issues around access that have come up quite a lot in our ad hoc work program. David, you are completely right. This whole process is acronym soup. The official title is the Ad Hoc Work Program on the New Collective Quantified Goal on Climate Finance. And I can say that very fluently because I've been saying it all year. So I thought maybe what might be most useful is to give an overview of exactly what the NCQG is. So as David had said, the NCQG was decided in the Paris Agreement. It was called the Post-2025 Goal. And the aim of this goal it would replace the current $100 billion goal, which was extended to 2025. So what comes after this? In Katowice, we decided, which was in 2018, we decided that deliberations on the new goal would begin in 2020. With COVID, these were delayed to 2021. And so at the COP in Glasgow in 2021, parties agreed on a 3-year ad hoc work program to agree what the new goal would be. This ad hoc work program includes 4 technical expert dialogues per year, an annual high-level ministerial dialogue every year, and multiple rounds of submissions which would feed in and inform the process. The reason that this was decided in this way was one of the key criticisms of the $100 billion goal was that it was decided with not a lot of transparency. It was developed countries together. It's often been referred to as a back-of-the-envelope calculation with very little consultation from developing parties and non-party stakeholders. And so what parties really wanted to design was a process that was inclusive, and so that when you get to the end of the 3-year process, the decision is made based on inclusivity and in consultation, having thought through all the major issues. And so we started that process, and fast forward to COP27, the Egyptian COP presidency appointed myself and my co-chair Zahir Fakir to lead the technical process for this year. We have held 4 technical expert dialogues, and thank you, David, for coming and contributing a lot to all of those. And our mandate this year was basically to identify what the key elements of the goal are. And based on these elements, identifying options on each of the elements. And so we held 4 technical expert dialogues. The first one held in March was on the elements of structure and time frame. How should the goal be structured? Is it just a provided goal, similar to like 100 billion plus? Is it provided and mobilized? Does it, bring in the private sector in some way? We spoke about time frame. Is it a 5-year goal, a 10-year goal, 15, 25, a 50-year goal? A combination of those, a short-term aspirational goal or a long-term, a short-term actionable goal and a long-term aspirational goal. And we identified options under these. The second technical expert dialogues was held in conjunction with the June SB session in Bonn. And this was held on the issue of the quantum and how you would decide the quantum. Who decides the quantum and what do you need to consider in deciding the quantum? It also discussed the sources of financing, which is one of the most politically sensitive issues. And again, under both of those topics, we identified options on those two elements, which are captured in a summary. And by the way, there's a summary of every technical expert dialogue discussion, and you can find that on the UNFCCC website. All you've got to do is Google NCQG, UNFCCC, if you can remember that acronym. Fast forward to September, and we held the third technical dialogue for this year, but really it's the 7th technical expert dialogue. And we held that in Geneva, and that was on the issue of transparency arrangements and also qualitative arrangements. How do we, should there be qualitative aspects? I mean, the mandate is that it's a quantified goal. It's a new collective quantified goal. But should there be qualitative elements in there as well? And here, the issue of access was raised. So qualitative elements such as, should it say something about, impact, effectiveness, access, debt? These were all raised as qualitative elements, including consideration of gender, Indigenous people, how that is reflected, workers, which relates to the issue of just transition as well. So this is what we had discussed at TED 7, and these are all, again, integrated into options into the summary as well. And then just before COP started here in Dubai, we held the last technical expert dialogue of the year. And this was basically a stock taking of the 8 dialogues, as well as an outlook to next year. So how do we design a process that's going to be fit for purpose next year? Do we continue with the technical discussions? How do we make best use of ministers? Should we even use ministers? And these were all discussed as well and options identified. I should note that we are in the second year of a 3-year process. The mandate is that we would decide the goal next year, but already negotiations underway right now suggest that there is some desire from parties to already agree some of the substantive elements, with the ones that don't prejudge the discussion next year, but nevertheless could provide some guardrails. For example, if we could decide on maybe the structure or the time frame, that gives us some guardrails to the discussion for next year, set some parameters so that we can then discuss the interlinkages between all the other elements as well. Everything is still on the table. There is no agreement on the structure, the scope. Would there be sub-goals? Would there not be? What are the qualitative elements? How should the quantum be decided? What will the quantum be? And who contributes? All these issues are still open. And the technical expert dialogues, along with the political track, will really seek to sort of bring these together, find the interlinkages, perhaps come up with options on the different packages of what the goals would look like, with a view to agreeing a robust and ambitious and a strong NCQG by the end of next year. Before I finish, I just want to touch on the issue of access, because this is what we are discussing today. Access is raised a lot. In every single dialogue, this was raised. And the issues are not new to anyone in this room. The difficulties around access, both in terms of mitigation and the special difficulty around access, around adaptation as well, and loss and damage. We addressed, the challenges of accessing bilateral funding, accessing, the GCF and GEF, particularly the GCF was raised a lot in the context of concerns around, the long lead-in times from project development to actually seeing dollars flow into a project. All these issues were raised, and participants really discussed, well, what can the new goal do about that? And some of the ideas that were raised was that access could be a qualitative feature if we have principles, if you have a set of principles that guide the implementation of the new goal. Another idea was raised that you could have qualitative elements and principles, including around access, for different sub-goals if you were to have sub-goals. So the principles around access would be different, for example, for mitigation, or for adaptation and for loss and damage as well. These conversations are still ongoing. I would fully expect participants to continue raising this across the technical expert dialogues next year. And I would be very surprised if we don't see some recognition of access and the difficulties around that, and some guidance around how the NCQG could address that in the final package of the new goal. With that, I finish my remarks. Thank you again, David, for inviting me. I must send my apologies. Very intense negotiations are going on across multiple items. I have oversight for climate finance, adaptation and loss and damage. So it's going to be a late and busy night, and I might have to just run back shortly after. But thank you again for having me, and it's great to be here. Thanks for your attention.
Yes, fully understood. And we always remind ourselves that the negotiations come first here, not the trade fair. But it was, those are two excellent opening comments and really set the tone for this session. And before we get to a great panel discussion that we have lined up for you, we have one short presentation. GEF and GCF have commissioned independent analysis on to create a long-term vision on complementarity, coherence, and coordination amongst the two funds, between the two funds. And that was overseen by Mr. Remy Rouat of GEF, and we're going to hear some of his, some of the initial sort of findings and key insights that may have come from that. Thanks very much, and let's go on with that. I'm going to move down here next to my colleague.
Sorry. I'm just going to get that. So good evening, everyone. Welcome, and happy to be here today to get the opportunity to present some insights from the study that we have jointly commissioned between the GEF and the GCF to foster collaboration, complementarity, and coherence. My name is Remy Rouat. I'm a senior climate change specialist at the GEF, and I look forward to present you some of the insights of this study. Today, I'm going to present first some background on the study, on its methodology. I will also present then a few examples of the kind of mappings of our policies and processes that have been conducted by the independent consultant, which prepared the study for us, and then some insights and discussing a little bit about the next steps, although you've heard about it already 2 days ago when the joint declaration between the four funds was released. So some background on the study. It was mandated by the long-term vision on complementarity and coherence and collaboration, which was presented to the GEF Council and the GCF Board in 2021. So the LTV has been already integrated and mainstreamed in the respective replenishments of the GEF and the GCF. There are some major initiatives going on. The Green Wall initiatives, for example, is one. We are reporting annually to our governing bodies with a joint progress reports, and we're also collaborating with the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance, and we will be able to hear a little bit more later on this. The mandate was to conduct a thorough analysis of the policies and processes of both funds to identify recommendations to support complementarity and coherence. So that's the first part. And the second part, assisting developing countries and partners to generate long-lasting impacts for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So this was done with the modality of a comparative assessment. It was conducted by an independent consultant, Bastel. They went with a desktop review of policies and processes of both funds, ranging from a variety of topics, and they also conducted deep engagement with secretariat staff, with the members of the governing bodies, but also with beneficiaries, as well as other stakeholders. What we got at the end of this process is a detailed report and a summary. I will share with you the link at the end of this session. We also got some learnings, institutional learnings, on how to move this process further, and also on what it means to compare policies and processes of these two funds. We encountered some data comparability challenges, so that is also a learning per se. And the consultant identified some opportunities, some of which may have some challenges in feasibility, depending on if we look at the short term or long term. And then the relevance will be either for secretariat level discussion or actions, or more for discussions for consideration of the governance bodies, so the GEF Council and the GCF board. This is one example of the kind of workflows that have been identified as part of the study. One of the benefits that we identified going through this process was to get to know each other a little bit better. So this is the kind of figures that the consultants prepared for us, in which we identify what are the different steps from origination to closure, and going through proposal development, review, approval, implementation, that stakeholders have to go through in order to have the idea of the project and then discuss the project, develop the proposal, and implement. So as you may see, the steps are very similar, but the key features that are governing these steps actually have a lot of differences, and this is something that I want to go in a little bit more detail in the next slide. So we identified three main differences in the area of approval processes, in particular in terms of whether or not it is possible or meaningful to compare timelines, for example, for project review. And some of the key differences that have shown some challenges to us related to these three areas. So the first one relates to how allocation is made. For the case of the GEF, allocation is made at the country level. Country benefit from a star envelope for most of the programming. There is also now some exceptions with the integrated programming. So with this star envelope, the funds are set aside at the PIF stage, which is the first stage of the project development, and are then secured for the project proponents to work on it during the project preparation phase, and reach then a CEO endorsement, which is our second step. For the GCF, on the other hand, the allocation is made at a portfolio level, which take into consideration a variety of criteria in terms of portfolio targets, in terms of availability of staff, in terms a variety of criteria which go beyond the sole consideration of which concept has been sent first. And so for this reason, it is not really straightforward to compare the way the projects are reviewed, because on one hand, you have projects that are allocated at a country level, and on the other hand, projects that are allocated at a portfolio level. The second difference is the step of intervention of the governing body. So for the GEF, this is the council, and the council intervenes at the first step, so we call it the PIF, the project identification form. The funds are set aside by the trustee once this first step is finalized. For the GCF, the board intervenes at the second step. So for the GCF, the first step is the concept notes, the second step is the funding proposal. And one thing to note is that recently the concept notes have been made optional regardless of the size of the project. But for those that use concept notes, the board intervenes at the second steps. So for these two reasons, the consultants that worked on this study identified that the risk is not borne by the project proponents at the same level. For the GEF, the risk will be rather at a country prioritization level, where some agencies or project proponents may put some work in proposals that may not be kept in the end for proposal at the GEF. For the GCF, on the other hand, this risk is more at a portfolio level once the project is submitted. So these are also important features to take into account when comparing both funds. The last one is regarding the post-approval phase. And one of these differences relates to the legal nature of both funds. So the GEF doesn't have a legal personality. And so after the approval, there is no agreement between the GEF and the country. It's a direct agreement between the agency and the country. Whereas for the GCF, there is a fund and entity agreement, and then an entity and country agreement. And finally, in terms of data availability for the implementation phase and the closure phase, given the young nature of the GCF portfolio, it was not possible to compare both portfolio at this stage. But we found that comparing at least the key differences in those processes was relevant for us to understand our differences a little bit better. This is just to show you very briefly the other types of mapping of our processes and strategies that have been conducted as part of this study. So we looked at our programming approaches and what actors are involved, what are different windows, the role of our focal points. For the GEF, it's the operational focal points. For the GCF, the NDA. We looked at the thematic alignments between our different windows, whether they have a main entry on mitigation or on adaptation. We also looked at our various program supporting access. So some of them are programs, some of them are more strategic level. Some of them are related to projects. For the GEF, for example, our preparation grants is project related. And then we looked also at our reporting structures in terms of which partners are responsible for the evaluations, for the monitoring, who we report to, what kind of independent bodies intervene and at what step. So these are all maps that are available in the study. I just wanted to show you some brief insight of what it looks like. In terms of findings, the study categorized three main areas of opportunities that could be leveraged and that will be discussed between the funds. So the first one is to continue to leverage the strength of both funds and to test engagement modalities. So the LTV has already identified such modalities, and you will hear about it a little bit later on. And this includes parallel and sequential funding and assistance, but also coordinated and collaborative programming. Another one is to create incentive and guidance and support for these collaborative approaches. Because when discussing with the main stakeholders of such initiatives, one of the things the consultants realize is that there is a big transaction cost for all actors involved, be it at the agency level, at the country ministry level, even at the staff level, secretary staff level. And therefore, there is a need to identify incentives to trigger this kind of collaborative approaches. So one of the areas would be to prioritize areas for collaboration in the context of respective replenishment processes, addressing the cost recovery in terms of engagement, providing some capacity development support, as well as sharing good practice guidance based on the pilots. Finally, the last one is something you will hear about, is to build on those joint investment pilots, increase awareness about the possibility to receive such support. In terms of our processes, the consultant looks at what would be opportunities for streamlining and harmonization, and they categorize those in three categories. So the first one would be to identify common requirements in our templates, which could then be candidates for simplification. Once it is established that a certain, for example, fiduciary standard is similar for both funds, then project proponents could possibly go faster on those requirements. Increasing coherence in the guidance and application of key concepts. This is something we have already started to do, for example, in terms of adaptation, impact rationale, in terms of a theory of change. That is something that has been also cited in the joint declaration of the four funds. And also benchmarking streamlining measures from other funds. In terms of addressing these incentives that I mentioned earlier, one of the areas that was mapped is to possibly...
That we heard from Germany, of course, about the call for, thanks again so much for being here, and good, bonne chance. The call for the loss and damage fund to learn from this experience, I think that's a very important one, because we've seen that GCF is a relatively young fund, and yet, you know, there's so many differences that have been created here, and now we're trying to work through how to harmonize. So that's a challenge, but you can see that the funds are taking it very seriously. So with that, let's move on to our economic development of Uganda. Chiz Aoki, who is lead environment specialist and at GEF and manages the relationships with the multilateral environment agreements, and Alisher Mammadjanov, did I get that right? Close enough? Close enough? Yes, it's not getting any easier. Who is the multilateral governance manager at the Green Climate Fund. So, switch back to here. Thank you all very much. And let's get right to it, because I know, having announced that we're going to have a social gathering at the end, has you interested in that as well, and we're all getting our steps in here in Dubai. We're going to have a roundtable, and we're going to, what I will do is I will direct an initial question to each of the panelists. I am aware that you have a time constraint as well, so we will, I'll sort of combine. Change funds are getting requests for streamlining and simplification of procedures almost daily, and certainly as a part of the broader thinking about reforms. Could you maybe give us a sense beyond this study that we've heard about as to what is happening within GEF and GCF to try to make that a reality? Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, David, and good evening, and thanks for those of you who are here. I know today's a very, very, very busy evening for climate finance over in B1. So, just to clarify, and as well as to give you a little bit of context, we're having this conversation here for the climate COP in terms of simplifying access as well as trying to harmonize. We're also hearing this in other conventions. We're hearing this in CBD, we're hearing this in chemicals conventions, we're hearing it on almost all, I would say, of the conventions that we serve as a financial mechanism. At this point, we have basically 5 conventions plus a new agreement, which is on high seas. And within the GEF, we have 6 funds. We're a family of funds, right? So in terms of how to streamline and make our access easier for the countries is not, for the GEF, it's not confined just within the realm of climate finance, although it is an arena that has I would say, the most visibility in terms of the need for this. So what we're doing on this particular area is that as part of the replenishment negotiations of the GEF 8 phase, there was a clear call for us to really start looking into how can we actually simplify the access modalities. And this is something that's going to go to the next council meeting in February of this year. There is a document that will go to this. And I would also have to say, one of the catalyzers for us to look into different ways of simplifying and enhancing access was the creation and establishment of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. And the part of reason is that within the setup of a GBFF, parties in CBD specifically asked for harmonization as well as simplified access, enhanced access to it. So what that meant was when we were having the conversation within the GEF family on the establishment of the funds, it was clear to us we could not go to this, the council with the same project and programming cycle. We could not go to council with the same policies and procedures, and we actually did not. And we also did not go to council with exactly the same governance structure we have for the GEF Trust Fund as well as others. So we already got started, head start if you will, somewhat unexpectedly for the GEF family, because GBFF was obviously not created prior to the conclusion of the replenishment negotiations. But for the GBFF, we ended up actually coming up with a simplified access modality, one-stop shop, as well as basically different ways of going about asking the countries to submit proposals. And there will be further clarity by the time we go to the February Council for the first GBFF Council meeting. So that also provided us some impetus, if you will, on looking into different project cycle simplification, and I think try to start to learn from what's actually feasible under one fund, and how those lessons, if not lessons, how those sort of structural modifications as well as evolution can also be applied to other funds. So this is basically the beginning of the conversations within the GEF and the GEF 8 period to see what could be done. Mm-hmm. Obviously, for the upcoming replenishment negotiations, which will start in early 2025, the issue of the simplified access will be front and center, I'm sure, right? And this is something that I think all of us are sort of prepared to look into further. And I also want to put one thing on the table. Remy did a really nice presentation on the study of policies and procedures, some similarities as well as a lot of differences. At the end of the day, there's a lot of willingness, but I think we tended to speak on somewhat of a limited analytical foundation. It's also been somewhat driven by the wish to see changes, but it was not necessarily grounded on third-party studies or good analysis that would help us inform in a more productive way the conversations that need to be taking place within the secretariats, but also at the board level. And so from that perspective, I think what we have done right here isn't just for the study itself useful. I think that's also going to help inform the future discourse of how the funds can work together. What are some of the choke points that not only could we be looking at it from the operationalization perspective of the secretariats as well as what we can do, but what can we actually present to the respective boards to really start thinking about at the governance level, the changes that actually would need to be at least thought about for the near to the longer term future of the whole notion of complementarity. So I will
Great.
stop right there. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Jiz. In the interest of giving equal time to GCF, I think I'll direct my next question to you, Alisher. If you could, you know, the second replenishment of GCF is nearing completion, and these topics certainly arose during that process as well. Can you say a few words about, you know, how that was responded to as a part of the GCF replenishment? And given the amount of time that we've taken getting this far, you might want to also address any of the issues that were laid out in the study by Remy in answering your question, because I think we want to see how this can be put into practice, at least some of those recommendations that came from that. Thanks, Alisher.
Thanks, David, and good evening, colleagues. I will start by sharing some good news that maybe some of you not aware of, but of course we've seen also this COP a lot of large-scale announcements on climate finance, and also for GCF this second replenishment is already record-breaking. So I'd like to thank all our contributors who came strongly: UK, Germany, US, and other 27 contributors so far and counting. And together we have now the contributors have already reached 12.8 billion for this replenishment. And of course, while in this important year, also our board was working on the new strategic plan for 24-27, and indeed the issues of access, enhancing access, simplifying access were at the center of discussions. And they are reflected all across the strategic plan, but also would like just to mention we have a separate section in the strategic plan on operational priorities, and most of them are about access, specifically issues like predictability. And here, the strategic plan is talking about some more predictable timelines for accreditation, for review of funding proposals, so that parties would have a bit more clarity. Now, of course, I'm in the negotiations still. The developing countries would have more predictability and to also would plan better. And in terms of speed, it's also the speed is about implementation rate, how quickly we make funding available so that our accredited entities can start implementation. Also, simplification. Simplification in terms of procedures. Here I would like to mention our updated simplified approval process, which has been increased up to 25 million from 10 million USD of our funding, but also has many other simplifications number of process compared to our funding normal funding proposal review process. But also issues like, which may seem sometimes very banal to us, but are very important to countries, that we saw an issue of languages, the use of languages. So during the consultations, on the projects, So multilingualism and use of languages is also one of the important aspects that we saw. And for operational priorities, also happy to say that complementarity, the matter of complementarity is also embedded there. And there specifically it talks about aligning our programming with other climate funds. And of course, GEF, and we've seen through LTV, and we already have some experience with that, is of course one of the priorities that we will be now working on in this regard. And of course, these aspects are also reflected in our ED's vision, so Mafalda's vision 50 by 30, where by 2030 we envisage GCF to become to have a portfolio of $50 billion that would be managed in an impactful way. This is an important part to it. So also for LDC seats in African states, this was also mentioned today. We in the new also in GCF2 will continue to have a special for adaptation, which is very important for this category of countries, allocation floor of 50% for those countries. So this will also continue. In terms of LTV, I think Remy and also my colleague Hansol, who was working with you, we can now second you to each other, and because you know so much the other fund as well as your own, and this is indeed the process helped us to understand each other. I fully agree with you on this one, and I think what I personally saw, and one in conclusions and recommendations, is this indeed already within existing modalities, the sequential process, how our comparative advantages can be used to help countries in a sequential manner, for example, have a readiness by GCF, and then through star allocation, a GEF project, and then, if needed, a follow-up project by GCF. So such obvious things that we can already do now. And I think in the context of the also task force on climate finance access, the work that we started in, and of course, colleagues will talk about this. I will not go too much in detail, but already revealed opportunities, huge opportunity there to do joint investment planning. So how we can work jointly on at the country level. Of course, now it's 5 countries, but potentially in the future can be scaled up. And my final point, sorry, David, is about, of course, now these joint statements. So now we started as 2 funds on this, also with the pavilion and the LTV, and now we are happy that we have 2 of our other sister funds to join us, Adaptation Fund and CEFs, and this, of course, will bring even more to us strength to us climate funds. And again, please visit us here nearby in our joint pavilion to learn even more on how we can work together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Faustin, I was going to turn to you, but in the interest, I know Debbie, because of these these negotiations, is going to have to run. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask her first. And just to note that you've already mentioned the task force, and the UK has certainly given a lot of attention to improving recipient country capacities in terms of their access, and also you've gained some experience with this task force. I wonder if you might share some thoughts based on those perspectives gained.
Good evening, everybody. David, thank you very, very much. It's lovely to be here. And actually, I'm genuinely sorry that I'm going to duck out, because I'm really, really enjoying this discussion, and I'm hugely heartened by the work and the presentation and the spirit everybody's bringing to this conversation. Because I'm not somebody who comes from the climate world, I'm somebody who comes from the international development world, and I'm really struck listening to this conversation that we have done this before in other sectors. I don't know if anybody remembers in 2003 to 2006, we went through this with the World Bank and the IMF through the PIFA framework on expenditure management. We also had to recreate a whole set of health international institutions in 2010 to 2014 and recreate quite a lot of the architecture around the Global Fund for AIDS, TB and Malaria. So we're not alone, and we have done this in other sectors, and I sort of want to give strength to all of your elbows that we keep driving forward to something which is this important. And it really is important, and it's important to the UK because we know that we need sufficient and high quality climate finance. We know that access to finance is a concern that is raised repeatedly and vociferously by recipient countries because climate finance is too slow, too complicated, and too burdensome. And that's the challenge that we collectively face. And I really do mean that collectively because we as donors have imposed a whole set of criteria and requirements in terms of risk and reporting and auditing, etc., which is partly at the heart of this. And as we go forward, if we are to be successful, we are all going to need to do a little bit of letting go. And that's painful, that's difficult, right? That requires all of us to sort of work together. And it's in that spirit that the UK launched in 2021 under our COP26 presidency the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance in partnership with Fiji. And that was very much about looking at how we can transform the way that climate finance is accessed through programmatic approaches based on the last 2 years has been working with 6 pilot countries, that's Bangladesh, Fiji, Jamaica, Uganda, Rwanda, and most recently Mauritius. And it's very much about trialing new approaches in line with a set of principles and recommendations that have been agreed to work out how we can get more quickly around, as I said, sort of programmatic approaches behind integrated national action plans. So the UK and Germany and others, many other donors have been supporting these trials. The UK has provided £100 million in terms of commitment to try and drive these things forward. And as I said, it's very much a shared initiative. There's a very interesting spirit in the steering committee of partnership and solidarity. And the steering committee is made up of both climate vulnerable countries, bilateral and multilateral climate finance providers. So it's very much everyone together, including MDBs, including the GEF, the GCF, etc., and indeed colleagues on the panel. Here at COP28, Somalia was announced as the 7th pioneer country, being supported by the UK and USAID as anchor donors. And again, that's a really great opportunity to look at how in countries with elevated levels of humanitarian need, we also might need to look at a slightly different approach to systems. So again, the trials are offering lessons, hopefully offering blueprints for other countries, and we're already seeing lesson learning across different geographic locations, which I think is really helpful. And I know colleagues on the panel will speak to lessons from Rwanda and Uganda, but just to briefly speak on a couple of the other trials. So in Bangladesh and Jamaica, for example, we've got new national systems now being designed and established to try and generate a pipeline of really bankable project through a set of project preparation facilities. And the idea, what we've seen in Jamaica very recently is that there's been quite a lot of partners involved, but it has very clearly crowded in both public and private investment behind national plans and national strategies. Again, this week, we've seen Bangladesh announce a new climate and development platform, which again is part of a collaborative approach with lots of different partners, Bangladesh, the IMF, the ADB, the AIIB, and the GCF, which is wonderful. And again, the aim of that pipeline, that platform is to generate a robust pipeline of climate projects, which at the moment, if I may, feels like a bit like the Holy Grail. This is what we really, really need, particularly in the adaptation space, is bankable projects and to build up, if you like, not just a retail approach to projects, but actually a wholesale approach to projects, so we can really bring the finance in at scale. And by taking that kind of more programmatic approach, what we're seeing, particularly because we are able to work with the IFIs and a wide range of donors, is we're beginning to see that we can build up sustainable systems, which means that we can start to scale. And that's the bit for me which is really exciting, because that's where we shift from doing project by project, which takes a lot of care, a lot of maintenance, blended finance and risk reduction, to actually getting to the point where we've built a marketplace, we've built an ecosystem, and then we can actually start scaling the amount of finance which is being brought in. So As I said, I hope the lessons from this can be really helpful. We're really, really proud to be working with the GCF. We're really proud of our pledge of $2 billion recently, and congratulations for the nearly complete replenishment, which is now at huge scale. We're also really proud to be working with the GCF as well, and to be one of the, to the GEF, and to be one of the top donors there, and to be contributing. So I'm going to stop there, but just to say, for me, this is so much about collaboration, about learning lessons, about really thinking what our clients, if I can use that term, or the beneficiaries need, in order that they're not juggling multiple different systems, multiple different data sets, multiple different bits of paper, but actually we're creating a system and an ecosystem that can work from top to bottom to the benefit of the poorest and most vulnerable, climate vulnerable people on this earth, who we should be serving through these systems. Many thanks.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and slip out. That's fine. Sure. So, well, it's quite a setup for Faustin and Dennis. We've been hearing about all of this work that's gone in, and it's no coincidence that Rwanda is co-chairing this effort, because you have been very strong advocates for this kind of effort. And I wonder if you could share some of your experience with this process so far, and what's been learned, and maybe what you could share with other developing countries in terms of that experience that might help them, please.
Thank you very much, David, for the good question. I also want to thank GEF and GCF for inviting us at least to share the experience from Rwanda. Let me first of all start with the good presentation we had on the analysis of the differences between the two methods we are using in GEF or GCF. It was very useful, because the institution where I'm coming from, Rwanda Environment Management Authority, it is at the same time the NDA for Rwanda, National Designated Authority for GCF, and it is the GEF operational focal point. So we are combining the two. So seeing that analysis for us is very helpful, and some of them we have been noticing them, because we are running two processes in parallel in the same institution. And it was not by mistake that Rwanda nominated one institution for both, because we wanted the coordination, and we wanted to make sure that we used resources efficiently. Then when we come then for the programmatic approach, as you said, we have been advocating this. We are advocating for programmatic for three main reasons. The first one is that it allows a comprehensive and integrated response to climate change issues, instead of solving issues in an isolated way or in a scattered manner. The issues we are talking about, most of them are related to impact of climate change, which are landslide, floods, droughts, and everything. When you don't handle it in the comprehensive way, and you take the whole watershed, for instance, and you take half of it, you are just exacerbating the issue instead of solving it. Second reason is that it promotes the country ownership and optimizing the allocation of resources. When you are formulating a project in the scattered manner, when you submit a project to GEF or to GCF of 10 million and a program of 40 million, for instance, instead of submitting 3 proposals of 555, then submit a program of 40 million. Then it will help even to reduce the time consumed in that process, and even the cost of that. Last but not least, it is helping us to ensure that funding is directed towards initiatives that have a greater potential impact. When you have a small project, it comes and it's like a drop in the sea. You can't recognize the other drop which came because it's mixed up in the sea. But when you have a programmatic approach and you make sure that all the resources focused on that issue you identified well in advance, then after the actions, you see the impact. The positive impact is vivid and tangible. Those are the three main reasons, and then how we can advise countries as well to approach this programmatic approach. First of all, there are also 4 main points I want to make here. The first one is to putting in place conducive policies which are helping this programmatic approach to work. Second is strengthening the capacity of institutions, not only government institutions, but also local community and also various interveners and key stakeholders in that process. For this one particularly, through our Green Growth and Climate Resilience Strategy, Rwanda has established a Rwanda Green Fund as the vehicle to mobilize climate change finance. If you have that institutional framework, it helps you then to leverage finance and use the resources efficiently. Third, it helps also the identification and formulation of projects and proposals. When you have a conducive institutional setup, it helps even various interveners to develop proposals and bankable projects. Last but not least, ensuring transparency and accountability is very key, because we need to build trust. So to build trust, it doesn't just come like that. You need to have to put in place a transparency and accountability mechanisms so that you can convince any donor, any partner, so that any coin you put in that system will work and will reach to the destination and will have the positive impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dennis. So we've heard all this now, and you've recently been through a similar experience and signed on as a pioneer country in this area. Can you please share your experience? And so I asked Faustin to sort of advise fellow developing countries. Maybe I'll also ask you to maybe think about, we've heard so much from the 2 funds. Can you maybe give some advice to them too, now that we've heard all of this from your experience? And I recognize it's still ongoing, so please.
Thank you so much for that question. First of all, we are privileged as Uganda to be the first country that has tried out the LTV. We had the GCF and the GEF physically in Uganda for 3 days, sleeping together, eating together, and thinking about the 28.1 billion that Uganda has to raise.
Same hotel anyway, yeah.
So under the NDCs. Now, similar to Rwanda, Uganda and the Ministry of Finance has the same department that I head, that is the NDA, but then also handling the GEF operational focal point. So it means already the countries are thinking about this being coordinated in a good manner, and I think the funds have to follow suit. Because we use the same template when evaluating both the projects for the GCF and the GEF. And when we are engaging our partners, this is what we have. So we think that that harmonization should also be on the side of the funds. So we had a good discussion from 15th to 17th November. And we had a number of suggestions to the GEF and the GCF. We saw some areas where we think that some improvements should be. And some of these speak to the fact that both funds have to look at aligning their support to our NDCs. It's good we had this discussion about the new quantified goal, because if let's say you look at Uganda, 28.1 billion over a period of until 2030, but we are raising 100 billion for the whole world. Imagine. So Uganda's financing is actually 28.1% of what is required by all the developing countries. So we have to look at these and see if they really are in line with the ambition we talk about. Then the other one was we also think that the long-term vision shouldn't be only looking at the two funds, because we have to have a deliberate effort to also look at the other financing, the CIFs, the adaptation fund. We tried out in Uganda, actually when we were programming for GEF 8, the meeting looked at funds from the STAR location, it looked at funds from the LDCF, and then we also discussed how to scale up the financing from these two windows when it comes to the GCF. If you look at the amount that we think that now is within the LTV, it's around above 100 million, because we had two projects under the programming, under the food systems, that were looking at 7 million. But then we have a corresponding project with the GCF that is 50 million. So that linkage and scale up. And then also under the LDCF, we identified in the cattle corridor, because of the fact that we have issues with water, a project that we are looking at raising 9 million from the LDCF. But then there's a corresponding project that we have started discussions with the GCF that is 48 million. So we have to be deliberate when it comes to making sure that we leverage the GEF resources to scale up the investments from the GCF. So the LTV will have the intended outcomes if we are deliberate about this. So, because even when we work together, even when we harmonize, we have to be deliberate on making sure that the financing is seen to be programmed in that way. Then we also thought the GCF and the GEF have opportunities to undertake capacity building for the different countries. Now, we think that at least let's try out and see how can we harmonize. As we make sure that the templates we're using, let's have joint trainings, regional trainings. Under the task force to access climate finance, one of the things that we learned as Uganda, we initiated an engagement in the East African, East Africa, where we have technical climate finance directors coming together from like 8 countries. And we are sharing information on how best can we improve on access. What are they doing better? What are the new modalities, financing modalities they're looking at? How do we improve on access, direct access? What are they doing? Helping the likes of Somalia, helping the likes of Congo to come together, because we have the same problems when it comes to some of the things that we highlighted, and we think that from the presentation, I see there's a lot that has been done from then, and we're happy about that. we can also use this as an opportunity to scale up the learning lessons. The one was in Kampala, now next year it's going to be in Rwanda. But even the other blocks, even the other regions should take up this, and it can be an initiative that has been started by the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance, but we can also engage the other countries that are not maybe in the West Africa to take up the same at a technical level, not at a political level, but at a technical level, because this is where everything happens first. So I think that those are some of the lessons that we learned. I'm happy that the colleagues from the GCF and the GEF that were in Kampala are here. Filippo and my fellow panelists were here. And I've also seen a colleague from, I think it shows good spirit. It shows that we are thinking about how best to increase climate action. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've had a very robust discussion here, and I know we're a bit over our original aspirations on time, but just before we close, could we just let you have the last word since you were so kind to let Debbie speak? You know, if you put yourself in 2030 in, you know that. But yes, that's true too. You can think of something, you know, just off the top of your head that you'd really first and foremost like to see by then.
Thank you, David. So I think we spoke about harmonization. So this is something new. Also, joint statement that we put together as 4 funds, harmonization is mentioned, and that we will move towards enhanced harmonization. And this is, and I think there is a limit to what we can do. We need to get mandates, but also potentially something already that secretariats can undertake. And where needed, we need to go to our mandate. So I would like to see better harmonization.
Okay, that's one. That's it.
Yeah,
that's good. It's good.
And second is more systemic change in the climate finance. Yeah. So system approach.
All right, within the harmonization, within the context of systematic change. Okay, cheers.
Are you asking me as a person or as a GE?
You can answer. You can caveat any way you want.
I'm going to speak as a person.
Good.
I'd like to see something akin to college application form so this is something in the United States. You know, before, so a little bit of explanation. If you wanted to apply to universities in the United States, school had a different application form. Every single school had different requirements. There was a common test you had to take, a couple common tests you could take, but you had to submit it different ways. But then there came this thing called the common application form, right? Which basically simplified for all the students, you know, what they needed to actually fill to apply to anything from, you know, state schools all the way to Ivy League schools, right? Can we move in that direction? You can still sort of customize different things for different funds, but can we move in that direction?
Yeah, I think that's what we should do.
But that's a comment as Chiz.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Not speaking as head of delegation.
Both.
Okay, good.
I want to see a predictable climate finance, because in the negotiations we keep singing the same song. Climate finance need to be predictable, additional, but is that predictability there? So we want to see the predictable, and also we want to see trust among partners. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all. I think let's thank our speakers here for all that they've done. And I just want to say in closing that it's very